My name is Stephanie Fox. I'm the strategic organizer for climate and environmental justice. I'm really excited to show you some of the stuff we're doing with environment with open data here at the office. A couple different things we're going to do. We're going to hopefully give you a little bit of a better understanding of what we do as an office when it comes to addressing climate change, and we'll hopefully give you a better working understanding of our climate dashboard. So the comptroller's climate team, we actually have two different climate teams. We have our policy-oriented one and our finance-oriented one. The climate-oriented one entails me and also Louise Young, who is the chief climate officer. As I mentioned, we also have an ESG team who focus on the financial aspects of environmental justice here at the office, mostly focused on climate investments. Now, we confront the climate crisis in a couple different ways. We've tried to focus on shepherding an equitable and just transition to a low carbon economy. When it comes to transitioning our economy, we don't want to just think about it without thinking about people. We take a people first view of it, essentially. And we want to be prepared and New York City to be prepared and resilient to the impacts of climate change, centering communities on the front line. And we do a couple different things one second. We do a couple different things to make sure that we do that. So one thing we do is policy analysis. We do things like policy recommendations to mitigate risk of climate change and prepare New York City for a resilient future. A couple different of our things we've done on the bottom are some of the policies that we've put forward. Some of you all might be familiar with Cap the Credits. Made some news. It's focused on capping credits for renewable energy credits for Local Law 97. We also strategically organize. It's what I do. Strategic organizing, kind of working back and forth between the public and the policy side to make sure that we're working with environmental justice groups to make sure that voices are coming into our policymaking process, so it's not just top down, and also making sure that we're communicating what we're doing so people are prepared and understand the work that we are putting forward. We advocate for legislation, policy changes, go to hearings, attend rallies, things like that. We manage pension investments. When it comes to looking at long-term risk, that is a major issue when it comes to finance. And that is also something greatly impacted by one of the greatest long-term threats we have to the city, which is, of course, climate change. We've done a couple different things this past year. We'll actually talk a little bit more about it when we get to the dashboard. But some of our climate goals that we've put forward include having a net zero investment portfolio. And we also try to provide transparent and reliable information, like the New York City climate dashboard. Now, I'm sure you all know climate risks don't affect everyone equally. There is different vulnerability for different kinds of people, and it's shaped by different kind of factors. For instance, physical exposure. Urban heat islands are more impacted by heat than some other parts of our city. Sensitivity. Older adults face greater heat risks. Or capacity to adapt. People who can't afford to use AC are more at risk at heat exposure. There's also racial disparities, which we'll actually show a little bit within our dashboard as well. So in our work, and hopefully through all your work utilizing this dashboard, you can add a climate justice lens to seek to redress different needs and see how different economic issues and social issues impact local climate risk. Climate change is exacerbated by underlying racial and economic inequalities. Part of what inspired some of the maps that we're doing in the dashboard was inspired by looking at this. On one side here, we have red line New York City neighborhoods from the 1960s. And then we have on the right from last year, heat vulnerability index. And you're going to realize that a lot of those areas that were redlined for different reasons, largely speaking, racial issues, but also things like immigration status, are largely speaking, a lot of the areas that are still greatly impacted by heat vulnerability right now. We don't believe such things are a coincidence. We believe such things are based on underlying factors that make people more at risk compared to some of the actions we've taken with environmental and racial justice. So yeah, let me show you the actual dashboard. I'm going to pull it up right here. Can you all see the dashboard? I can't see anyone, so the host, if you can just say you can hear me. Nima?
Sorry. No, we still see your presentation. We can't see the
cool.
dashboard.
New share. Boom. How's that?
Yes, we see it now.
Cool. Awesome. Great. All right. So New York City Climate Dashboard. Here it is. So to find it, all you have to do is go to Services. There's a drop-down menu for the public, and it's right here, New York City Climate Dashboard. Click on that. Brings you to this page. So this is the introduction page. Just talks a little bit about what this dashboard is. Talks about our city's goal of getting to 80% greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, and things like that. It talks a little bit about what climate change means for New York City, such as extreme heat, sea level rise, coastal storms, rainstorms, all of which will be covered in the dashboard itself. And you see at the top, we have different subsections that focus on different aspects of environmental justice and climate justice. Now, the vast majority of the information that is on this page is from New York City Open Data. New York City Open Data is an amazing tool that we're able to utilize for this. The only problem is that a lot of open data in its raw form, they're not necessarily directly usable to activists, community groups, people who want to utilize the information that they can utilize from open data in their everyday work. So the goal of this is to basically make data usable and easily viewable so people can have more usable access to that data. So let's start with energy. Our energy page covers a couple different things. At the top is the New York City area power mix, showing a contrast between fossil fuels and zero emission fuels. You'll notice the vast majority of New York City's grid comes from oil and gas, almost overwhelmingly dual fuel, but that's usually also gas. We do have a little bit of hydro, a little bit of nuclear, and a very small amount of other kinds of renewables. Now, if we're trying to get to 80% reduction of greenhouse gases by 2050, we have to do things like make sure that our grid is cleaner. There's a couple ways to do that. One way to do that is by building transmission projects into our city to get renewable energy from other parts of the state down here. Now, New York City is, a very dense place. It's a place where we don't necessarily have things like large open fields to put wind farms or whatnot, or areas to put dams up or anything like that. But we do have one resource, and that is rooftops. So our city has a goal to install 1,000 megawatts of solar power by 2030. We're pretty good, well on our way there. We're pretty proud of the stats, the work we've done so far. If you look down here, you can see how much solar we've had every year installed in the city. And you can see up here where our status is. This is going to be updated pretty soon. We're actually a little bit ahead of schedule, which is good news. Some work that we're doing here at the comptroller's office to get more rooftop solar installed is we have a program that we're working on with the administration through the IRA called Public Solar New York. What that's going to be is it's going to utilize the power of public finance to make it easier and more affordable for low-income people to get rooftop solar on their roofs. Right now, there's a lot of barriers to that. We're trying to bring those down. We're going to start with a pilot project. We're going to hear back if we get funding for it from the federal government in a couple months. But if that all goes well, we expect to over the next 4 years solarize about 5,000 homes across the state, across the city. Next up, let's look at emissions. Now I mentioned we're trying to get down to 80% of reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. But how are we doing? It's one thing to know and one thing to put forward a goal. It's a whole nother thing for people to be able to hold us accountable to that goal. In order to do that, you need to know where we are as a city and the nature of that. So what this chart does, it shows you year by year total emissions from New York City from 3 different sectors: waste, transportation, and buildings. So you can see them all separately, and you can see kind of how they're all increasing or decreasing. But we go into a little more detail too. We take all those and we break them down further. So when it comes to buildings, you can see residential versus commercial versus manufacturing. And you can see the different kinds of energy they use: steam power, natural gas, electricity, and fuel oil. So you can see, like, for instance, residential properties use more natural gas as opposed to commercial properties, which tend to use a lot more electricity. And we also have this map here, which can show you the percent change from 2005 to 2001, 2005 being a benchmark year. And this is a pretty cool map. It's going to take a second to load because it's a pretty detailed map. But Local Law 84 basically required certain class of buildings to report their greenhouse gas emissions every year. So what we do is we take all the information that gets collected in those things that's in a gigantic sheet, and we attach them to GIS, and we put them on a map. So you can actually look in your specific neighborhood. Let's look at Red Hook, and you can see exactly where different buildings are that are subject to this law, how they're dealing with greenhouse gas emissions. And even better, when you see that if you live near a red dot, which is a building with a D, you can actually click on it and it'll bring up exactly where it is, what it is, the nature of its emissions, who owns it. So you can actually find ways to hold those building owners, those polluters accountable. Let's look at transportation. We break down transportation either further. For instance, you can see emissions from transportation. By far, the largest emitter of emissions in New York City is passenger cars, just regular cars driving around the city. We'll see how this gets impacted by congestion pricing once it gets launched over. But right now, we still see a very significant amount of greenhouse gas emissions from passenger cars. We can also see we track medium duty trucks, heavy duty trucks, buses, marine diesel, jet fuel for aviation, diesel, and electricity. And you can see which direction our usage is going for all these based on our benchmark year of 2005. We're also tracking total number of bike lanes built every year and specifically separating them out from protected versus unprotected. And we're also tracking bike parking spaces. It's great to have bikes. It's great to have bike lanes, but if you don't have anywhere to put your bike when you arrive somewhere, I know I've personally been in that issue before where I couldn't find where to rack my bike up. Makes riding a bike a lot harder. So one thing we want to do is we want to make sure there's plenty of spaces for people to put their bikes so they can utilize them freely. And last, we have waste. So one thing we're showing here is organics participation. You can see schools, buildings with 10 or more units, and buildings with 1 to 9 units. You can see that, largely speaking, schools have flattened out. That's because all the schools are now participating in organics collection, which we're pretty proud of. You can also see that 10 plus unit buildings have gone up quite a bit in recent years. And you can see that 1 to 9 unit buildings went up very high in 2018 and then completely crashed. And the reason for that is because we cut the program, which is a massive shame. But we started up this past year, and we're going to see this going up as we institute citywide mandatory compost, which we're really excited about. So we're excited to see this red line go up. And here you can see diversion rate by borough. If you happen to be the competitive type, you can see different boroughs and how they're doing by diversion. Now, when we say diversion rate, we mean anything that diverts stuff from a landfill. So that can be organics collection, or that can be recycling. So you can see the Bronx right now has the lowest, and Manhattan has the highest. Climate finance. This is a fun one because this is a page completely dedicated to holding our office accountable. Now, I mentioned that for 3 of our pensions in the city, we have a goal to get to net zero financed emissions by 2040. We put forward a plan to do that, and they were approved by NYSERS, TRS, and BERS. So what we have here is we have a plot of where we are with reducing our emissions. This first part, this blue line going up to June 2022, that represents the divestment from fossil fuel reserves that we've already done. This purple line represents our plan. We have a benchmark in 2025 to get to 68 and 2030 to get to 41. And this is where we'll have to go after that. The reason why we don't have this plotted out is because we won't be in office. So we can't make promises for what the next comptroller does. But I think it's really important that we make sure that we have comptrollers that value reducing financed emissions. And you can see that for NYSERS, you can see that for TRS, and you can see that for BERS. Those are the 3 participating retirement systems. And you can also see total emissions by system. We have them listed out by scopes 1 and 2, which are direct emissions, and scope 3, which are indirect emissions. Scope 3 are the trickiest ones to reduce. So we're making sure to track those separately so you can actually see the total amount of emissions that we're looking at, and not just cheating by just reducing scope 1 and 2. And we also made a commitment to get to $50 billion in investment in climate solutions. That's proactive solutions. We have a goal to get to 50 billion. We have some intern goals, including getting to 11 billion by 2025. You're going to see right here that in 2023, we already got to 10.9 billion. So we're ahead of schedule. We're going to be making some announcements about that soon, which I can't tell you about, but I can tell you that I'm really, really excited about them. But stay tuned for that. But yeah, this is tracking where we are in our investments. Environmental quality. Now, this is basically looking at pollution in our city, looking at land, sea, and air. Let's look at air quality first. So, you all might remember last summer we had a day where the entire sky turned bright orange. It's a day that none of us are going to forget, I'm sure. That was caused by fine particulate matter in the air. But fine particulate matter doesn't just happen when it's visible. Fine particulate matter happens over the course of an entire year. If you look at this map, you can see different parts of our city that are most impacted by fine particulate matter emissions. One of the things I think are notable is the future congestion pricing zone, bright red from particulate matter. And you can see like a lot of the areas where we have highways tend to be darker. We also track nitric oxide, which seems to mostly come from industrial areas. You're going to notice that these are all industrial areas that are bright red. Nitric dioxides, which we have a massive problem with in our city, as you can see, because everywhere has a little bit of orange. This is actually a major issue when it comes to fighting in our fight to reduce the amount of asthma attacks in the city. Now, this is ozone, O3. Largely speaking, this happens in our coastal areas. So you can see Jamaica Bay is bright red, but areas that are further away from coasts tend to be a little bit lighter. A little bit by the Long Island Sound, you also see some more. And black carbon, which is exactly what it sounds like, carbon in the air. You're going to notice that it looks a lot like particulate matter, probably because it is caused by a lot of the same issues, stuff that's burning. We also have water. So right here, you can see every single water distribution quality sampling site in the city. So we have some great drinking water in the city, but every once in a while, a water main will experience, leakage or contamination. So we have sites all around our city that track that can be sampled by our DEP to see how that area is doing. And we have them all mapped out here, and you can actually click on them, and you can see the most recent sample, and you can see things like how much fecal chloroform is in the pipe, which hopefully should be none. Same with E. coli. You can check the turbidity, which is like the clarity of the water, chlorine levels. You can see if the area was passed or failed. And you can see this for every single site in the city. We also have a very cool map. So in 1961, our city banned the installation of lead water pipes in our city. And in the 1980s, we also banned different ways that we suture water lines with lead. But we have lots of buildings that are very old in the city, lots of ones that haven't been improved necessarily for a long time. So that means lead is still a problem in many homes, and we have hundreds of thousands of lead service lines around. This map shows every single property in New York City. If you live in a place that is a parcel in New York City, you can look at your parcel and you can see green for not lead, yellow for unsure, and red for lead. So you can actually check your property. You can check your kid's school. You can check your workplace. I know I was doing a training in Astoria at a after school program, and we looked at the building on this map, and it turned out that building had a lead service line, and they've since gotten bottled water for the building to prevent exposure to that. And we also use this filter too. This is a map of every single environmental justice area in the city. So you can kind of see how environmental justice areas interact with different aspects of this map. So you can kind of like compare them to like how much lead's in the area. And land. We are tracking bulk storage facilities and brownfield cleanup sites. Every single one of these yellow dots is a chemical bulk storage facility. It's somewhere that stores some kind of hazardous chemical. They're required to register at the state, and we put them on a map, and we'll tell you what's in them. Click on them. You can find out more information about it. For instance, you can see that this is a chemical distributor. You can find more detail by clicking through. And you can also see how that interacts with environmental justice areas. You're going to see that there's a lot more yellow dots in environmental justice areas than areas that are not environmental justice areas. It's one of the ways that racial justice and climate justice interplay with each other. And all these dots are brownfield cleanup sites. Now, brownfields are areas that were impacted by industrial pollution at some point and require pretty advanced cleanup. Every single one of these dots represents a place that either is currently being mitigated or has been mitigated as a brownfield site. And you can click on them. You can find out the details about it. You can see if they've approved a remedial plan. You can see the timelines. You can see who's responsible, things like that. And we also have, last but not least, resiliency. This is actually one of my favorite ones. When we think about climate change, and we usually think about rising seas. It's just going to take a second to load. So when we think about climate change, we think about rising seas. And we also think about things like coastal flooding. I'm sure many of you were around when Hurricane Sandy hit and inundated lots of areas of our city with that 100-year flood. Every single year, there's a 1% chance that if you live in a flood zone, you will get a flood. And that is increasing in lots of areas of the city. Currently, if you live in any of these areas that are blue or green, there's a 1% chance, based on the last projections we had, that you will be impacted by a coastal flood storm in a year. But of course, as the seas rise, we're going to see different floodplains. They're going to look different. So you notice in 2050, a lot more areas become part of the floodplain. 2080s, you see a little bit more. And by the 2100s, very large swaths of our coast, lots of North Brooklyn, parts of Queens, a lot of Flushing, a lot of the Bronx and Upper Manhattan will all be part of this floodplain. The big issue is that we have lots and lots of people that live in those areas and lots of businesses that exist in those areas. Coastal floods in these areas can cause catastrophic issues. But of course, it's not just those 100-year floods that are an issue. We also have just regular high tides. Right now, all these areas that are purple experience high tides that cause flooding regularly. Right now, by the 2050s, you're going to see a little more expanded. By the 2080s, you see large swaths of our coastal areas regularly being hit by high tide flooding. By the 2100s, you see Coney Island's largely speaking getting underwater quite a bit, and as is part of much of Queens, some parts of the Bronx, a lot of Staten Island as well. So what are we doing about it? That's a good question. We're trying to build resiliency projects. So every single one of these yellow or orange shapes represents one resiliency project that our city is funding. There's also state and federal projects, but this is specifically city projects. For these, you can see if your area is currently a part of one of these zones. Let's look at this one. You can click on it. You can see who's managing that specific project. You can see when it started. You can see when it ended or when it's supposed to end. So you can track where we have infrastructure for this stuff and how it's doing. I mentioned heat risk before. So here's every single community district by heat vulnerability index. You can see, depending on where area you live, if you live in a heat island area. We also track vegetative cover, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's parts of our city that do or do not have tree canopies to protect the ground from the sun. And we track environmental justice areas. Now, the reason why I point these out is because you're going to notice that there is practically mirror images of each other. Environmental justice areas tend to have less vegetative cover, and they tend to be higher and higher risk for heat vulnerability. We also track here coolet sites. Coolet sites are basically areas of a city that have some kind of cooling water form or other kind of urban aspect that will help you get cool. These are not cooling centers. Cooling centers are actually not mapped out in advance. They're constantly changing. These are specifically coolant sites. So things like water fountains, pools, things like that. Areas you can get cool or get a little bit of a soak in when it's hot. And you can click on them. You can find out exactly what kind of element that area is. And then last but not least, stormwater and flash flood risk. So one thing that our city is going to be facing more and more when it comes to climate change is we're going to be a wetter climate. What that means is we're going to get more stormwater flooding, and we're going to have it more often. But where will we have stormwater issues? So this area, all these yellow and blue sites are all areas that are currently at risk for moderate stormwater floods. But I'm sure a bunch of you have heard of microbursts. Those are basically extreme rainfall situations that happen in specific areas, or extreme stormwater flooding. There's a lot more of our city that is at risk under those circumstances. You're going to notice that much of our city is actually greatly impacted. Could be greatly impacted by an extreme stormwater situation. So what do we do about that? One thing we do is build more sewers. Every single one of these orange areas are a DEP sewer capital project that's currently being worked on. The thing is about large sewer projects is they're very expensive and they take a very long time to do. And right now, we don't have a lot of time to wait. So what are we doing in the meantime? We have something called green infrastructure. Green infrastructure is basically different aspects that allow water to be absorbed in natural ways. Things like permeable pavement or bioswales/rain gardens. Every one of these dots represents one kind of green infrastructure. And you can click on them and you can find out more about that specific project. If it's built already, what kind of thing it is. For instance, you can see that this is synthetic turf field storage layer. So basically like a field made of synthetic turf, which has a storage container under it to hold stormwater. And you can see which of these are in your area. We also track combined sewer overflows. The nature of how our city does sewers is that when you flush your toilet or when a rainstorm happens, they both go into the same sewers. Those sewers have a certain capacity, and we have a certain capacity to process that sewage and runoff mix before letting it back into our waters around our city. However, when there's a large rainfall event, what happens is those sewers get past their capacity. And what do we do with that? We dump it right into our rivers and oceans. About 5 billion gallons of raw sewage gets dumped in the waters around New York City every year. That seems like a lot. It sure is. And in fact, it is terribly illegal. And we are currently working with the federal government on a long-term plan to greatly reduce and ultimately get rid of our outfalls. So you can see here, these are all areas that are attached to basically outfall sheds. They're like watersheds, but sewers. And you can see specifically the different areas that those are dumped. This is good to know. For instance, if it's rained in the last couple of days, I wouldn't fish over here. You can learn things like that. And also, we do have the environmental justice area layer here, so you can kind of see how sewer infrastructure interacts with those communities. And we also have a little bit of resources here for community preparedness. So you can make a disaster plan for your house, emergency planning toolkit for communities, preparedness training for organizations, and continuous operations plans for businesses. And the last page is an important one. This is our feedback page. If you have ideas of how we can make this site better, more usable, more user-friendly, or anything else, please pop that information in this form. It actually goes to my inbox, so I'll see it. And we're trying to constantly improve this dashboard to make sure that it's keeping up with the needs of all people that seek to use it. And that's all I got for you.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, for sharing this awesome information about how to navigate the climate dashboard. We have a lot of questions in the chat, so I'll be opening it up to Q&A now. Just to spotlight some questions that were sent before.
Sure.
Mark asks, is the city's proposed move to anaerobic digestion of residential organic waste reflected in the data?
No, because right now, I mean, if we're talking about the waste emissions, that's more of a new thing. So that will be reflected in next year's numbers.
Okay. Carrie asks, how much of this data is broken down by the borough level? What's the lowest level of analysis? I.e., can we see by neighborhood or community board?
Anywhere where we have a map, you can zoom in to this, whatever specific area you'd like to.
Okay, thank you. And Allison asked, on the organics collection participation slide you shared earlier, is that the number of buildings that are eligible to participate in the collection in those boroughs, or is that the actual number of buildings setting out organic bins each week?
Actual number of buildings participating.
Okay. Um, Matt asked, what technology do you use to create the dashboards, maps, and clean or analyze the data?
Mostly we use Excel and GIS.
That's great. Okay. And now I'll be unmuting. I'll be allowing everyone to unmute to ask questions. So feel free to raise your hand and ask any questions. Okay, now you should be able to unmute yourself.
Gotta be some questions.
Oh,
Likewise
someone's
to see.
raising their hand.
Yeah.
Thank you, Stephanie. This has been great. I have a question about the emissions and I guess kind of slash energy tabs. And I'm kind of curious if it's possible, if the data is there for local emissions from local power producers. If it would be possible to get that data at some point, kind of near real time from kind of those, local, I guess, sort of like peaker plants, local generation.
If you know a public source that that allow us to do that, send it my way.
Okay. I've tried, of course, reaching out to, an owner in the past and I never got any information. So that's just not accessible.
I mean, I don't want to say it's not accessible, but I can just say that I haven't found it.
Okay, thank you.
If there are any other questions, feel free to just unmute yourself and ask. Vanessa in the chat asked, is it possible to filter and export data from the dashboard?
Like to like a spreadsheet or something like that? No, but we do have the source material that we got everything from, so you can actually go to those numbers and from those areas you can probably export data from. Like we have sources to original open data data.
Hi, Stephanie,
Okay.
can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Really nice job. This is Nick. And my question is, how do you see this connecting to, say, an individual New York City resident? Like, do you envision this ever connecting to a way for them to search by their specific street or house or building and seeing sort of instead of all the tabs, they could sort of see like, here's a report for what's around me, so to speak. And then I'm sort of wondering, like, what do you think is Comptroller's Lander vision for how this helps him and the city like push for the things he wants to push for?
So to your first question, I'd have to think about how we would be able to design that. I know that that's a pretty complicated way to put this forward. Right now, what we have is people can look in their specific areas based on the different maps. It's about as granular as we get, except for some of the specific ones that are specific to parcels, like our lead pipe map. As far as how this fits into our vision, a big important thing is that part of this holds us accountable. We want to make sure that people know that we're actually doing the work we're saying we're doing. When we say that we're divesting from fossil fuels, we want people to see what that looks like. We want people to know what the emissions are coming out. When we say we're doing better, we want people to have the data to show that we know that we're doing that. We also want to show that for other parts of our city, because our city has made some great climate great climate goals, but goals are only meaningful if we actually do the work to get there. So largely speaking, we hope that this can be used to hold the city accountable, to make sure that we're constantly improving and getting closer and closer to our goals in a reasonable amount of time.
Thank you for answering, Stephanie. We have some more questions in the chat, so I can read them out.
Cool.
Someone asked, if you were to ask a genie for one fix to the tools you're using to collect and use this data, what would it be?
So we want to automate a lot of this data, but a lot of it is difficult to automate because instead of adding data to the current, what's it called? The current spreadsheet that's on the open site, they actually just like add another spreadsheet. So we actually have to go back and do them all over again. If I can have a genie just automating everything to make sure that everything comes in a constant stream on the same source, that is what I would do. We're currently struggling with figuring out how we can automate more of this, and we think a lot of it is, some of it is automatable, and we're working on what that might look for the dashboard. But I would love to automate everything, especially because I do most of this by hand, and that is not always easy. Takes me a few months to do every update.
Oh, so the office uses Excel sheets and not a database.
Yes.
Oh, that's great. Is there any data that you wish you had?
I mean, someone mentioned the specific emissions from specific polluters, and that would be pretty cool. There's a lot of data that I would love to have. I would love to see things that are specific to utilities, so we can see specifically what utilities are doing because they're infamously not transparent. And I think people have the right to know, what kind of infrastructure is being built in their neighborhoods, or what kinds of infrastructure needs to be built in their neighborhoods that aren't currently, or like how often their local grid has been updated or improved. If an area is constantly getting brownouts, they should know why.
Mm-hmm. Few more questions in the chat. Is there a GitHub site or an API for the data or code?
I don't think so, but let me check and get back to you there. You can email me if you like. My email is sfox@comptroller.nyc.gov. That's sfox@comptroller.nyc.gov.
Okay. I also sent it in the chat.
Cool.
So for attendees who have more complicated questions about the code or the data, feel free to email Stephanie that email.
Yeah. I will say that what's it called? I am the person who finds the data and presents the data. As far as the brains behind the operation, that'd be my coworker Archer, who unfortunately wasn't able to make it here today. I'll probably be bouncing the more technical questions off to him.
Yeah, that's great. Oh, Archer is here.
Oh, Archer's here. Hey, if, Archer, you want to answer any of the more technical questions? You're the brains of the operation. So
yeah, are there any more questions anyone would like to unmute and ask?
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, how are you? Thanks for the presentation. I was wondering if the controller's office is also trying to be able to enact some sort of like policy change in order to, just like advance more of like the green sort of like technologies or things that are happening around the city. Like if this is like a way to maybe like start being more like visual and sort of like do a little bit of PR what's happening around New York City, and if this maybe has already happened.
Yeah, I mean, like one example is the rooftop solar example I gave earlier. That's something that we're actively working on. Some of the policies we're working on is that public solar in New York policy. We're working on some waste issues. We're working on issues related to congestion pricing, and like a lot of the issues that come from those specific sources. You can see data about that in this this dashboard. So there are ways to hold the city accountable to make those goals as well. So I guess our ulterior motive here is making it easier for people to push for some of the great environmental policies that we're currently trying to enact or trying to push for.
Thanks. And just one more question. It says that we're going to be like 80% by 2050. How come it's not 100%?
You're gonna have to ask the mayor that.
Okay. Okay.